How many of you out there like to personalize things about your gaming experience? Whether you enable subtitles or like to meticulously customize your characters, or maybe even secretly turn your brightness all the way up on dark horror games. Believe it or not, all of these are inclusive design decisions. You see, the thing about inclusive game design is that it helps everyone, even those who don't consider themselves as diverse players. I'm Mari Kyle, and I'm a game producer on the Oculus Studios team, where I most recently helped to produce Resident Evil 4 on MetaQuest 2. As a gamer, I benefit from inclusive design all the time. I have a disability that impacts the way that I game, so I know firsthand that inclusive design makes a huge difference in the success of a game. But beyond people like me who need inclusive settings, inclusive design in general is about empowering your players when it comes to how they experience your game. And that affects everyone. Today, I'm joined by my very special guest and my favorite gaming buddy, Tom Ivey, executive producer from Armature Studio on Resident Evil 4. Together, we're going to talk about considerations to help make your game more inclusive, some common pitfalls for designing for diversity, and we'll walk through how we improved features during the development of Resident Evil 4. Tom, welcome to Connect.
Hi, Mari. It's good to be here.
So before we get into the meaty bits of this conversation, I would love to hear a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. I've been in the games industry for 20 years now, first as a designer and now as a producer. And during that time, I've worked on games like Ultima Online, the Metroid Prime series, the Donkey Kong Country Returns series, and most recently, you and I worked together on Resident Evil 4 for the MetaQuest 2. And throughout my career, I've always been interested in the challenges of designing for inclusivity. But in the last few years, that focus has kind of shifted from traditional gaming platforms to this unique landscape of VR. So specifically, I'm interested in the ways that game designers can be more inclusive of a diverse range of audiences, especially when building games that are heavily targeting physical immersion.
Yeah, let's dive right into that.
Sure.
Your career has spanned both massively successful VR and non-VR games. And I remember in all of our conversations throughout development, you were really passionate about that balance of making things immersive, but also making things playable for people who maybe don't have the skills as, say, like a highly trained special agent.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that balance of immersion and usability?
Yeah, absolutely. Game designers have been working on accessibility and inclusive design for years in the non-VR space. And honestly, even with all that work, I think it's still pretty dire. So while you'll have basic accessibility options like color blindness or subtitles or controller rumble, there's still huge issues faced by audiences with accessibility options like limited range of motion or cognitive barriers. And a specific concern for designers in the VR space is that so much of the focus of developing games and experiences for VR has been on this concept of replicating real-world movement, right?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, that's an amazing goal. When we talk about advancements in VR controls, we've been really dedicated to removing the artificial layer between the player and the game, right? So that's that abstracted controller input we've always had. So you want to grab an item, you have to press an A button. And when you want to move the item, you have to use an analog stick.
Yeah.
Now we're asking players, just reach out with your physical hand, grab the item, and use your arm to move it around in the physical space.
Yes, there's something amazing about that feeling of intense immersion. Yeah. But to your point, everyone's definition of what's a realistic movement in a realistic game is different.
Yeah, and it's with this kind of heightened desire to make games, quote unquote, more realistic, right? We're at risk of regressing backwards and once again leaving huge audiences of gamers behind. And a lot of that is simply because we're patterning so much of this realistic movement on a specific type of person and their physical abilities.
Right. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that idea that everyone's designing for, this specific type of person. Usually that type reflects the developers themselves, right? Designing for their own abilities and their own lived experiences. So I want to talk about how we can, move past that to get to those more inclusive designs. I always say that, the best place to start is to have a diverse team. But sometimes, even if you have a diverse team, you can't catch everything.
Yeah, we totally experienced this firsthand at Armature. When we were working on Resident Evil 4, we had a fairly diverse set of developers, right? We had heights ranging from 5 foot tall to 6'5", sizes ranging across hundreds of pounds, across different genders, including several people with limited range of motion and a wide variety of motion sensitivity, right? We had QA testers that could handle smooth turning at like max speed, but also developers that could only play with our teleportation mode.
Yeah, and I remember that in addition to all your internal teams at Armature Studio, on my side at Meta, we organized external testing and white paper groups that actually pushed those ranges even further, including folks who had limited visibility, limited mobility, limited hearing, and other disability groups.
Yeah, and of course, lots of developers don't even have access to that
Yes,
testing.
yeah.
But even if you do, you can still miss the mark.
Mhm.
At Armature, we had really focused on this problem. We had created extra large ranges for grabbing objects, lots of slop room on timings and distance,
Yeah.
and what we thought was a large suite of comfort options to account for a wide variety of body types and motion sensitivity. But there was still a major tenet of designing for accessibility that we had to consider, and that's the intersection of these limitations.
Yes, that point is so important. There are so many people in our spaces that have intersectional identities, including myself. So, for those of you who are new to the concept, I want to give an example of how that can show up when you're testing. In one case, I had a tester who was both colorblind for red green and also sensitive to intense VR locomotion. And this was a combination that the design just didn't account for because we had a red laser pop up to show you where you were teleporting to in a predominantly green forest environment. So this tester couldn't distinguish the laser from the surrounding visuals. So even when we were planning for inclusive designs, we still built something that was ultimately excluding them from progressing further.
Yeah, exactly. I think there will always be combinations you don't think of,
Yeah.
or a representation that you don't have in house. You're always going to miss. So the question is, how do you focus on missing less? And what do you do after the fact when you get feedback from players about how you miss? So immediately when you ship a game, I think it's incredibly important to actively seek out indications of groups you may have left behind. So I think you'll remember after Resident Evil 4 shipped, we searched for feedback in reviews, in message boards, in social media, in bug submissions. I mean, we looked all over the place. And we started adding tags and tracking trends to get a sense of the types and the scale of problems, but also how they were being encountered. So the point of all that is that we could carry hard data back to the development group about how best to improve the experience for as many players as possible.
Absolutely. I remember those long hours looking through all those feedback forms, and it was so much fun kind of seeing how people were interacting with the games. Sure. But I actually remember the exact feature that we were able to improve with this kind of feedback searching. Our challenge with Resident Evil 4 was that we had to think about how to bring those tried and tested controls from the original game to this new VR version. And a part of that was the holsters for items on Leon's body.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, so there's this feature where a player can grab items off their chest like a grenade and use them immediately in the heat of the battle. But after we launched, we actually saw user reviews that mentioned that people were still having difficulties grabbing these items.
Yeah. Even with these extra large ranges we built in, which we'd found supported our extended set of testers quite well, it just wasn't enough. So we sat down. We took the feedback and reassessed the design entirely. We thought, why limit the player to some internal number that we think might fit them well? Why not we just put it directly in the player's hands and let them offset the holster positions in any direction, in any distance, so they can put them, exactly where they feel comfortable with them. Even if that might seem like an extreme range to our standard testing group, why? It doesn't matter. Just let them do that. So we worked up that system along with some additional color blindness and movement options, and we released a patch to address the feedback we'd heard.
Yes, that January options patch was so important, to me and also to all of our players. And I think it's so important that we were able to take that step and say, even while we're working on the mercenaries, that these options are important and we need to get this patch out as soon as possible.
Yeah. And I think an equally important point is once you've completed work on a game, to take those learned lessons and package them up as your new base standard for any game moving forward. So that way you're driving into the next project at a better starting point from day one. You have a library of options and understanding and the right questions to ask any new design. The hope is that you've broadened your way of thinking more. You've gotten better at putting yourself into the position of somebody possibly very unlike you. And you're asking the right questions about how your design fits their reality. I think in that way, you're taking the first step in a pattern we should all be striving for, which is designing for inclusion and accessibility from the ground up.
Yes, to me, there's no such thing as like too early for accessibility and inclusion. Honestly, considering, these topics even as early as your conceptualization and your prototyping phase is really the best way to make sure that your game is inclusive through and through.
Yeah, start early at a foundational level. I think that's super important to the things that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And on that topic, I want to talk a bit about some common game features that you and I see all the time that can actually exclude people from your games if you're not too careful.
Sure.
As more and more VR games come out, I've been starting to see a wide range of apps, from combat to productivity apps, kind of make the same assumptions about their players and implement settings for those assumptions as
Yeah.
if they're like this new standard
Yeah.
for how VR should be, which isn't actually always correct. Maybe we can use the live example of those holsters in RE4 to kind of talk about how we approach this issue.
Yeah, of course. You and I were talking earlier about grabbing items off these holsters on your body and making sure that we allow the player to position these types of interactions well to fit their body shape. But another concern with these types of real world body mappings and movements is thinking about people that have a limited range of motion or a limb difference. That could range from the inability to turn their head past a certain angle, or move their arms outward or above a certain height, or even just hold grip buttons consistently, or keep their hand in one place, or a complete lack of input from one or both sides. Right?
Absolutely. There's a huge range of what people can or can't do when it comes to those types of interactions. I remember back when I was on the content review team here at Meta, there was a reviewer who couldn't do repetitive, heavy swinging arm motions. And I hadn't realized just how many of our VR games require you to do that in order to complete the game.
Yeah.
So what are some things that our developers can do to make games more accessible to players with these types of mobility restrictions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think on Resident Evil 4, we implemented a few solutions to some of these cases. So, for example, for users with limited mobility, we added a quick select menu option in place of these mapping items, the items to your body positions. So in that way, you could just press an analog stick in a direction to select an item. And when you select an item in that way, it would attach to your hand. So it also helped people, that had difficulty holding a grip button consistently.
Yeah.
And while those additions were targeted at accessibility and inclusion, they were also just preferred by many people, regardless of their particular abilities, which is great. That's the point. The more options and control a player has over the way they can play your game, the better. But to be perfectly honest, this was a solution that was targeted at a specific system implementation. So we should also be looking at the fundamental ways we're asking players to move in these spaces and how we can help to support them.
Yes. I know we've said it so many times throughout the session, but these kind of improvements help all players, not just those with disabilities. And to your last point, I know some of these cases are being solved by external tools right now, like devices or applications that do things like allow the player to set a specific offset on their controller positions, or maybe scale their movements so that a small movement reads as a large sweeping movement, or filter their input so that an uncontrollable movement is dampened down.
Yeah, and in many cases, these are very simple solutions, but they can profoundly affect a player's ability to play your game.
Yeah.
But there are very few games or SDK level interfaces that implement these kind of fundamental types of input factors. Instead, I think designers are still targeting a specific system or a behavior in the game that's simply fallout from the fundamental issue of limited mobility. And I think that's often just because many of us are still not aware of the basic issues that are facing these groups. Or we're still just getting better at putting ourselves in their place and asking the hard questions about how our designs are accessible. And I think that comes with time and effort and consistency of action on these types of issues.
Yes, consistency. I love that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how we can design for accessibility and inclusivity in regards to the way the player character moves or acts in the space. But another common aspect of game design that could be non-inclusive is the player's representation in a game.
Yeah.
So, I've had so many experiences in games where I was all excited to go into character customization, only to find out that out of all of the options available, none of them reflected or represented me. So there's this element of character customization that can feel disheartening. Like you're trying to build a representation of yourself in this fantastical virtual world where anything is possible except for being yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And this type of representation in VR is so important because players come to your game with a lifetime of lived experiences. And some of them may want to bring those lived experiences into your virtual world.
Yeah.
So giving players a wide variety of options for different skin tones or styles or textures of hair, or options for scars or marks or disabilities, that'll help them feel more welcome in your game. And hey, guess what? That has the side benefit of making your games even more diverse, which is
Yes.
kind of the point, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, and there's other reasons for having, these options in your games too. For example, if you're in a social VR game where you're, I don't know, exploring a landscape with a group of friends, the assumption that everyone can move in the same way actually changes when you have representative visuals like a wheelchair, a walking cane, or a prosthetic. And similarly, maybe in that same social world, you want your avatar to have like a hearing aid so that those friends can see that you're hard of hearing. These types of visuals can help your player communicate things to the world around them, even without speaking.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, another thing I, want people to consider is to stay away from associating character customization elements or items with gender. Making short hair only available on masculine characters or long hair only available on feminine ones can feel less inclusive. And even further, forcing players to choose from a binary is also limiting. I mean, it's virtual reality. Let people play whatever they want.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I know when I customize my character, I'm always super particular about making it look just right.
Yeah.
I sometimes say that I spend more time in the character customizer than the actual game.
Uh-huh.
But sometimes that's not even about making my avatar look exactly like me.
Mhm.
It's about making it look how I want to be represented in a specific game world.
Yes, I remember actually when we first started gaming together, I had so much fun kind of reintroducing myself all over again to like your online personality.
Yeah.
It really felt like I was getting to know this whole different version of you. And I think that's how you know that character customization is really working, when you can see someone as they truly want to be seen.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And yes, it's such a huge deal. It's so important to your players that you got to be thinking about these types of options.
Absolutely. I know there's a lot to think about when you're thinking about inclusive design, right? And I know it can feel overwhelming at times, but I actually think it could be broken down pretty simply. Inclusive design is good design.
Yep.
And when more people can play your game, you'll have a better chance at finding success. All right. Well, as we wrap up this chat today, I want to call attention to the folks at home for a new feature on the MetaQuest store. After the launch of the Accessibility VRCs back in 2019, we were able to gather some valuable data on how many of our developers were implementing accessible design into their applications. And pulling from that data, we have a new shelf live now called Play Your Way on the store that features applications where you can customize your experience with different accessibility settings. Well, we're at the end of our time, Tom. I'll pass it to you for your final thoughts.
Sure, thanks. I think, honestly, the main point I'd like to end on is one that you mentioned earlier, and that's inclusive design is good design.
Yes.
I think anything that makes you really break down the aspects of your game systems to their fundamental components and analyze how they could be expected to work against a variety of use cases will help improve your designs. And designing for accessibility and inclusion is an amazing way to gain insight into those types of use cases. Beyond that, listen to your audience, and be open to feedback and learning. You're not going to get everything right the first time, and that's okay. But it's important to continue to ask those hard questions early and design for accessibility and inclusion from day one.
Yes. And for me, just know that, again, designing inclusively benefits everyone. Gamers like Tom and I and so many others will thank you for thinking about us and including us in your vision for VR. Tom, there's nothing I love more than chatting with you. I can't thank you enough for stopping by and sharing your insights on inclusive design.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here, and it's always great to be talking to you, but especially when we're able to talk about such an important issue. And I really do hope that similar discussions and more importantly, action will be happening across the industry as we're moving toward this future of immersive VR experiences. Thanks, Wendy.
All right. Thanks so much for tuning in, and see you at next year's Connect.
Hey everybody, my name is Richard Duck. I'm a content launch manager here at Meta, and welcome to our panel, Designing VR Games for Women. You're going to learn a lot about how to grow your audience and accessibility. Why those two topics? You want to make sure people are enjoying your app, game, experience, or whatever you're working on. This is going to be a great way for you to take the time and learn about how to do that. Enabling more players or users to feel comfortable and excited will always pay off in spades. I'm joined here by two wonderful panelists. They're both going to give you a lot of great information, and I'm super happy to have them here. Ellen, do you mind starting off and talking about yourself?
Hi, Richard. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Ellen Utrecht. I'm from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, but I live in Los Angeles. I'm the founder of Mike TV, the studio behind Shores of Loshi, and I'm very excited to be here with you. Thank you.
Awesome. And for our second panelist, we have Ting. Do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Oh, yes. And hello, everyone. My name is Ting. I'm a game producer at Resolution Games. Resolution Game, we are one of the first game studio that focus on VR and AR since 2015. Right now, we have 14 titles across all platforms and around 170 employees. Myself, I have produced Angry Birds VR, Blastone, and right now I'm working with our social VR project, Tinyverse. We make social space for our multiplayer games to allow players to connect for play and other activities outside actual gameplay. I'm super happy to be here and share our experience together with Alan and Richard.
Okay, just a couple minutes in, you know that we have a great panel with some key information that's going to come up. So we're all going to learn a lot here. So I have a question for all of you, and let's start with this one. How can you incorporate all kinds of perspectives, diversity, accessibility, and more throughout the game dev cycle? Ting, I would love to have you kick this question off.
Oh, yeah. So I have to say this is a very broad question. I would just start with diversity, I think. So I would say diversity, it shows first in our development cycle is our diverse teams. Being diverse means a variety of people working at the same group, people with different backgrounds, age, gender, like culture, education, or just life experience. At Resolution, we really believe in diversity and inclusion. That's why we have a very diverse group of people working here. At the same time, we work in very small teams with different disciplines, such as coders, artists, designers, and me, producers. And we all contribute to the final product. So when we look at game design or trying to solve a problem, every member naturally take a look at the issue from their own perspective, no matter if it's professions or other parts. So in this way, we constantly discuss and get the best shape of the game design along the development. We really find this kind of team setup really boost creativity and just come up with better ideas and solutions. And the next is accessibility. And that part, I think, just to clarify, accessibility means that your game can be played by more players. I think there are two categories here. First is that your game can be played by more people by genre. So let's say your gameplays naturally reach out to more audience. If you want to make accessible game, you really need to think from the beginning how to reach out to audience from very beginning and very early design. Secondly, it can mean that your game can be played by more people, especially people with disabilities. And this can apply to a lot of different games, such as you can think about one-handed mode, seated play, and different locomotion settings and different control settings, even colorblind mode. And this is something you also want to think early so it aligns with other part of the game design.
That was fantastic. Thank you for all the information. I really loved that. So, one thing you can do, which I know is great for getting perspectives of all kinds, is to start testing your game right now. Test your game with any and everybody that's willing to check out your experience. You could think about how many different perspectives you'll get just by saying, hey, spend 5 minutes playing this game. Tell me how you feel about it. Get some feedback. Make sure it's consistent. Find ways to actually leverage and build a diverse circle to get the information that you need about making sure your game is polished and ready for everybody to play. Now, I've got another question that I want to bring up for our panelists. Do you develop for women in particular? And if so, what did you do to build an audience? Ellen, do you mind taking this?
Well, yes. First of all, our company is a female-found company, and so for us to actually develop something for women was a very natural thing to do. We really looked at the VR space, especially when I've started to work on the headset again. Actually, that was about 2 years. I think in 2020 when the first headset came back out, I was blown away by it. First of all, I hadn't really worked in VR for quite a while, and since then put it back on, and I really started to feel that this was now something that would become part of my ecosystem in some form of way. But I did feel that there was already quite a lot of games there that appealed to me, but I thought that would be more interesting if we could continue to really focus only on creating things for women. So basically we hired a full team, a full female team, apart from the developer at this point, who's actually male, but we had a full team. We started to look at, obviously, our background is marketing, so we really did look for a targeted audience, and that audience, being between the 18 and 30 mark, females. And we started to look at what their interests are and how we could target and focus on their gameplay. So more, moving away a little bit more from shooter games. We really wanted to focus more on meditation, but calmer, more interesting, for me, more interesting gameplay. So puzzling, we involved puzzling. We thought that was a very, very simple, yet, had been around for many, many years. And that combining that with meditation, things that, women probably like more than an average shooter game. Not saying that women don't like shooting games, of course, but I'd like to involve a different aspect. So that's how we basically looked at creating games.
Representation in all genres of games is key for establishing an audience in the first place. With what you said about shooters, if you're developing a title and aren't considering women or expanding the playset to include different and accessible gameplay elements, you might be excluding a huge audience. Representation shows up for me with hair texture in games. I often don't see great hair in games, and that's a really fantastic way to make sure that anyone with my hair texture was considered during the design of your application. Ting, what are your thoughts?
I was going to add to what Alan said, that I totally agree with what Alan has mentioned. From what I can see, there are more male players than female players in VR. And I totally agree that VR is definitely appeal to women. And where do we start to attract a more female audience into VR games? And I think it will start with those who make the games. And I would say when Alan and me, or like all other people are female in our team and Alan's team, when we make games, we naturally give suggestions or ideas from our, as a female player, basically. And then the final game experience will be more friendly to women. And I also want to point out that it's very important in our industry to have role model. Like Alan found her company, which is super cool. And also Resolution Game put me in the leadership position to build VR games. I think it all helps attract more female talents into this industry. And this helps the industry to thrive.
That was an enlightening response. I'm learning a ton. So you all have different perspectives and are great at determining how your different audiences react to your content. What are some great tips you want to share? To kick it off, I brought up earlier, diversity through the game dev cycle. It is key and has been brought up by other panelists. You want to make sure that you actually include it throughout the entire process. Again, I said, spend some time to figure out how you can, for example, make hair better. But how do you actually make sure that's going well throughout the entire process, right? Again, it has to be an entire and a deliberate process. You can't add it and tack it on at the very end. So, Ellen, I'd love to hear your take on this.
Well, for me, again, coming from a more narrative film background, I found creating for games such a different process, but such an interesting one. Like I really loved every part of it. But the thing that I found the most different, and the thing that I feel is super, super important, is the part that you actually involve your player from the get-go. So, I mean, when you're making a film, for example, it's the director, it's a collaborative art, that's for sure. Like there's a lot of people involved in making it, but there's one director's vision and there's a producer's vision, and they basically tell you what they're watching, right? What you're going to be watching. However, that doesn't work at all when it comes to gaming, because gaming is so every human brain works differently, so in that process, we have to be testing that process all the way along. And we found it really, really helpful to have testers tell us what they've thought of the actual game and how they were experiencing it, and how they and we had all different levels of ages as well, which I thought was an incredibly important part as well. We had people who were very young, like 15-year-olds, or all the way up until 80-year-olds playing the game, and even they had a very, very different approach. So for us, I think one of my biggest things was really testing. That's a new something that in advertising or in the film world you just don't want to do, and with gaming you have to do. So that's something I would really recommend.
Wow, yeah, testing is key, right? It's just like you're learning as you go and you're building as you go. Ting, I'd love to have you talk about how you implement perspectives and determining how your audiences react to the content that you create.
So I think we have a resolution. We love to build accessible game. So we have a goal that what kind of game when we want to build. We want to build the game that players can quickly get into when they put on the headset, have fun, and share their experience with their families and friends. And because of this goal, we're trying to focus on building accessible experience, then we can reach out to a broader audience. And I have a learning myself that when building this kind of accessible games, I think it's very helpful for your game to reach out to a broader audience. So I want to share it here with everyone. I hope you find this very useful too. And so I learned that hardcore gamers are usually more exploratory and experiential, while casual gamers are usually modeling learners. They want to see it, learn it, and then do it. So I encourage developers to give more space for modeling learners, to let them practice and master their skills at their own pace, rather than expecting every player to constantly adapt and enjoy new challenges. This is because hardcore gamers, they have years of core game knowledge. They kind of know how game works. They even with new mechanics or methods of play, they kind of got this will probably work confidence. But if we provide more modeling learner style tutorialization, even is optional or as a safety net, you might find your target audience is much broader than you thought.
Ting, I love hearing about accessibility in game development. And you actually read my mind about what the final question is going to be. Also, if you just happened to tune in a minute ago, you've already just picked up a goldmine worth of information. So, to close out the question of what's the one takeaway you want to share, Ellen, I'd love to have you close this out.
I would say that the most important part is to actually have women working in your on the product, designing from the get-go. That's obviously for me is the most important part. So, that's my tip. Make sure that we have plenty of females working at all levels in gaming and VR.
Designing for women and having women on your team will be part of the foundation you establish to not just have a great launch, but a great future for your application. I cannot stress this enough. It's not too late. Start now. Thank you, Ellen and Ting, for being here.
Thank you so much, Richard. It was lovely to be invited. Thank you so much, Ting, for being here with me. I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and very glad to meet Alan and Richard, and hope the audience can learn a lot as well from our discussion, just as me.
I want to thank all of you for watching this as well. From here, I want to see how you're designing for women. Make experiences that are accessible, diverse, and for everybody. I'm excited to see what you will create in the future. Check out all the other MetaConnect sessions and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for being here.
Hi folks, my name is Ted Denola, and I'm a developer relations engineer at Meta. My team provides deep dive technical and design feedback to developers like you as they create incredible experiences for MetaQuest. One of the most common pieces of feedback I give to developers is to be more generous with their interactions. Now, what is interaction generosity? It's my terminology for a concept that's been around in interactive media for decades. How do we reconcile the delta between what a user wants to do, their intent, with the inputs they're providing to the game or application? Now, here's an example anyone who's played a traditional platformer will be familiar with. The player wants to cross a wide gap. Due to a combination of factors, from hardware latency to psychology to physiology, this can be a difficult thing to pull off. With a simple change, in this case, providing a small amount of buffer time during which the jump input is still accepted, the task becomes much easier. We're able to better respect the intent of the player. And even though they might not have machine perfect mastery of the controls, they're able to clear the obstacle. Success! Studios coming from traditional PC, console, or even mobile environments are often used to working with interaction platforms that support discrete interactions, high levels of precision, and full visibility of the interface. Building for AR and VR adds many additional considerations. Positions move from 2D points to 3D ones, orientation and rotation need to be taken into account, and interactive elements can be placed around the player at any location, meaning there are situations where they may be trying to interact with something outside of their field of view. If most of your interactions occur far apart from each other, the first step you can take to help increase interaction generosity is simply increasing the area a user's interaction can occur in. This is especially important for objects a user may not be looking directly at when they try to interact. Have a belt-mounted tool on the user's left side. Don't ignore any interactions just because their hand isn't actually touching it. If their arm is down and a grab input is detected, just let them have it. In some cases, this type of interaction can be purely directional. If the object is in the 3D space, particularly if it's not anchored to the player, increasing the range of the trigger volume for an object being selected for interaction can achieve the same effect. Note that while this can also work well for distance-based interactions, if you have a discrete interaction visual like a laser beam for a pointer, you'll want to keep volumes tight, as users will have increased precision. However, if you allow for a flexible selection of distance, it can have the same benefit as near-field interactions. Your interaction should help reinforce the pillars of your game. Pistol Whip is built around feeling like an action movie star, and precise shooting is less important than being aware of where enemies are. And its shooting system is very generous. Similarly, while movement is a core part of the experience, the game respects what the player can see. Collisions are very forgiving once the front of a player's head has cleared an obstacle's forward edge, because otherwise players found themselves taking damage for no reason. Now let's introduce some more density to your experience. Assume you have several objects, either in the near field or at a distance that your user might want to interact with, which are all relatively close together. It's important to make sure that a user doesn't accidentally move off their intended selection. To accomplish this, you can give more weight to the interaction volume or an angle band for directional selection that a user is currently in until they are clearly selecting the neighboring object. That object becomes the new selected one and is weighted more strongly against any other interaction volumes. By only switching when it's very clear a user is trying to interact with a different object, the interaction will stick to the last one the user moved to. For additional polish, you can also trigger a change based on the movement delta of the user's controller or hand. If an object is selected and the delta seems small, stay in the selected object. See a big delta? That's probably the user trying to select something else, and you can reduce the amount of additional weight applied. We can take this design philosophy even further by trying to predict what the user is trying to do, for which we can rely on game state. Is the user low on health or ammunition? Did the user just complete an area? Is there a time-sensitive action they're expected to perform? Using your current game state, you can make informed decisions about what action a user is trying to perform and give that additional weight. Similarly, we can use variables to track what information the user has discovered. Imagine you have a puzzle game where the user needs to enter a passcode into a realistic number pad. The numbers are all spaced closer together, so the stickiness described above can be used to make it easier to go between each one. Before the player knows the right code, there's no way to tell what button they're trying to press, so factoring for intent isn't as important. Later, we know the player looked at the code, scrawled on a chalkboard or on a piece of paper they found in a desk drawer. They returned to the keypad to enter it. Since we know they saw the code, we can give additional weight to buttons in its sequence. After the first button is pressed, we can increase the weight in the second, then the third, and so on until the sequence is completed. Let's imagine we have a first-person shooter with immersive interactions. Inventory is managed physically, and weapons need to be reloaded and readied manually. Next, let's break down player interaction attempts and their outcomes without and with generosity applied over a 2-second fire and reload sequence. Without generosity, this common fire and reload sequence can be difficult and frustrating for a player, especially if they are in the middle of intense sections that can lead to failure. But with generosity, the player is more successful in executing this routine fire and reload sequence over and over and can focus their attention on the incoming targets. 1. The player needs to aim and fire the gun. Now, without generosity on their hand transforms, if their hands are in the wrong position or orientation for the gun, their aim could be very tricky. Or in some implementations, the leading or trailing hand could detach from the weapon. By using the vector between the two hands as your aim vector, aligning the gun between them appropriately, and by allowing tolerance on hand distance and rotation with respect to your player's intent to hold the weapon. If the trailing hand is out of alignment and the trigger is pulled, the gun can still be fired with confidence in the player's intended action. Number 2, the player needs to expend the spent casing from the chamber by lowering and pulling back the bolt lever, and they need to do it quickly. Without tolerances around the handle's grab volume and around the bolt's travel distance, they are likely to fail by either missing the handle, not lowering it fully, or not fully pulling back the bolt. For such a rapid action, if the grab is close enough and they roughly lower and pull back their hand, we can compensate and complete the action for them. More weight here can be assigned to the bolt handle to avoid the player accidentally grabbing the rifle itself or any other controls on its surface. Number 3, the player needs to grab ammunition. They reach down towards their right waist to grab some, but their hand is actually a little bit closer to a flashlight. By default, they would grab the flashlight at a bad time. Not super useful. Since we know the chamber is spent and they aren't looking towards their waist, we can be generous by putting more weight on the ammunition interaction volume so they can successfully grab a fresh round. Number 4, to reload the gun, they bring the round up to the chamber and release. Without tolerance here, if the bullet is in the wrong orientation or not properly positioned, it could fall to the floor. As long as the bullet is close enough, we can compensate for facing position offset, properly placing the round in the chamber. Finally, they go to push the bolt forward and lock it to ready the weapon. To do this, they grab the handle, move their hand forward and up, and release to grab the trigger. Just as in the ejection step, we can be generous here around the grab and the motion, so the player doesn't fall just short of properly readying the weapon. Now, there are lots of ways this series of interactions can fail. The weapon may be difficult to aim or may fall out of the hands. The chamber may not properly eject the round. Ammunition may not be grabbed or may not be loaded. And the weapon may not be ready for firing, despite the player feeling like they've done everything correctly. By being generous with the various steps involved, players are much more likely to accomplish the intended action and avoid frustration with the experience. Now, there can be cases where being strict about an interaction can strengthen your experience or mechanic. If precision is a key pillar of your experience, players come into it expecting to need significant coordination and accuracy. If a particular action is detrimental, such as a spaceship self-destruct button or a UI element that ends the session, lowering the weights on them can help prevent accidents. Use your best judgment, and remember that any interaction generosity can be tuned to what makes sense for your experience. Make it optional, especially in cases where having a range of interaction precision doesn't massively change the quality of the experience. Allowing users to select the required precision can be valuable. This is especially true in skill-based experiences, where demanding better performance from the user can add to the challenge or immersive feel. By letting users select this on their first session, you can also self-select users who prefer more precision-demanding interactions and who will therefore be less likely to blame the experience on any failed actions they make. Keep in mind, however, that for multiplayer experiences, it's important to make sure different tolerances don't provide a competitive advantage to a subset of players, or clearly display a user setting for transparency to other participants. A traditional example of this can be seen in balancing games that support both controller and keyboard, using features such as aim assist and target stickiness. Don't go overboard. Making your interactions too tolerant can leave things feeling floaty or mushy, or introduce more unintended interactions. Set aside time to iterate on any dynamic weighting logic and to tune tolerances in a way that makes sense for your experience. When using any sort of interaction assistance, there's always the chance for a false positive. Remember to think holistically about what interactions a user needs to perform and when, and make sure to lay out interactive volumes accordingly. Now, no attempt at predicting player intent will ever be perfect, but with testing and tuning, you can significantly reduce the chance that a user will perform an unintended action. An additional step you can take when implementing generous interactions can be to support multiple interaction methodologies. For example, you can have a fully immersive mode with manual reloading and inventory management, while also providing a button-based mode following PC or console approaches, allowing people to choose what they're comfortable with on their first session and allowing them to switch it at any time. As a bonus, this approach can also help increase accessibility for users who have limited mobility or small play spaces, or who are new to VR. Regardless of your application type, designing with generosity in mind can help significantly reduce frustration, perception that an interaction is broken, and the need to repeat attempts at performing an action. In experiences that demand the execution of a sequence of actions in a short time frame, failure to be generous can result in the perception that the experience is flawed, whereas allowing for some more imprecision can actually feel more precise. I always look forward to seeing how developers implement generous interaction design into their applications to help avoid player frustration and create more accessible and satisfying experiences. If you have any questions or want to share your own work, be sure to speak up on our developer forums.
Hi everyone, and welcome. My name is Franklin, and as an engineer on the VR Integrity team, I work on projects that help users stay safe while enjoying VR socially. Today, we're going to be talking about both sides of that coin, namely through multiplayer and integrity APIs. More specifically, first, we'll get into some multiplayer API highlights and upcoming features. Then, we'll hear from the developers of Golf Plus about how they've integrated our multiplayer APIs. And finally, I'll come back to tell you about the blocking API, a feature that increases safety, trust, and continuity for your app's users. With that, I'll kick it off to Dan to get us started.
Thanks, Franklin. Hi, my name is Dan, and I will be previewing some exciting new releases today. But before that, I want to do a quick recap of our multiplayer service offerings. MetaQuest users are a social group. To help people get together in VR, we've built out a set of multiplayer services as part of our Platform SDK. The Platform SDK has many features, so today I want to highlight 2 fundamental building blocks for multiplayer experiences: destinations and group presence. Destinations allow users to discover the latest content, jump into experiences directly, and coordinate with friends. Destinations are flexible concepts that you can tailor to your specific app. Here are some examples of how Beat Saber, Golf Plus, and Meta Horizon Worlds have implemented destinations. In Beat Saber, each destination is a song. Golf Plus created destinations for their different game modes. Meta Horizon Worlds has a lobby destination for people to hang out in before exploring other places. Group presence facilitates social interaction by showing users what their friends are up to. This can also help drive organic discovery of your apps. Together, destinations and group presence enable something we call VR travel, the process of helping friends get together in the same instance of an immersive app. Users have 3 ways to travel in VR today: group launch, app invites, and invite links. Group launch lets players start from a party with their friends before jumping into an app together. App invites allow players to invite their friends to the app that they're already in. Player can either use the system menu to bring up the invite panel or invite their friends through an in-app UI. Invite links is our newest invite feature. Players can share an URL to get together in a destination from the Meta Quest mobile app or in VR. Last year, we highlighted how Ready at Dawn implemented destinations and group presence in Echo VR to increase weekly active users and sessions with friends. Since then, the team has made significant strides in improving these services. This year, we have several exciting announcements. Reliability has been a huge focus for us. We want to ensure that when users travel in VR, they get to their intended destinations. We've migrated the travel system to a more stable infrastructure with plans to improve the presence service later this year. We're also adding new tools to help MetaQuest users better navigate travel interruptions caused by tutorials, IAPs, and app updates. Destinations are core to our strategy to display more real-time, relevant content to users. So, we'll be featuring destinations more often on the Explore tab and other VR surfaces. This could be a great way to showcase experiences within your app outside of the store. To make it easier to implement destinations, we are doing away with the lengthy destination approval process. Destinations will be available instantly, and we'll use machine learning to help check that published destinations meet certain source policies. Look for this change to go live later this year. We are also working on a new app-to-app travel API. You can implement this into your app to give users the ability to travel from one store app to another. This helps enable travel to other apps that you own or to apps that you partner with. During Connect last year, we walked through shared spaces as an example of how you can add multiplayer services to your app. This year, I am excited to preview a new playable multiplayer demo. Here's a quick teaser video. Wow, that was awesome. This demo app will be available on App Lab and on GitHub later this year. All right, you've heard a lot from me about multiplayer services. Now I want to tee it off to Ryan, the founder and CEO of Golf Plus, to hear about how his team has implemented multiplayer services in their app.
Can't hit them all again. Yeah, good ball.
Oh, come on.
Ooh, that's track.
Oh, baby. That's it.
Oh, you like that for a footy? That looks good. Go.
Oh, yeah, come on. Oh,
man.
Hi, I'm Ryan Engel, founder and CEO of Golf Plus. In real life, golf is a very social game. A big part of the magic of golf is sharing the experience with friends, so we wanted to capture that magic while developing Golf Plus and make it as easy as possible for friends to play around and golf together in VR. Multiplayer services have made that process easier for us, and I'd like to cover a couple of the services we implemented to help players connect. First, I'd like to talk about implementation. Initial implementation took a few days, and we started by reading through the documentation available at developer.oculus.com. Each API is well-defined and has a testing section to help developers test their implementation before it's publicly available. I'd recommend reading through the overviews of each area you're considering implementing before development begins to get a full picture of what the feature is capable of and how you'll be able to test if it's working as intended. Next, I'd like to talk about the first multiplayer API we added to Golf Plus. It's called Destinations and Group Presence. This feature allows our players to see what friends are doing within Golf Plus without having to contact them directly. One of the challenges of VR is coordinating where and how to meet up in-game, and this service helps solve that problem by allowing us to define specific destinations in-game and let players join their friends within those destinations. Overall, this helps players understand what their friends are doing in-game and increases the odds of a person noticing their friend is playing our game and deciding to hop in and join versus playing a different game. We're big fans of the social connection that VR creates, and this API helps make it easier to connect without external communication. Another API we added support for is deep linking. Deep links allow us to drop players into specific parts of the game using a web link. We've set up deep links that let you create a Topgolf bay and send the link to friends to hop directly into that bay. The link can even be included in a calendar invite instead of a video call link, and anecdotally, we've heard people often use them to do their one-on-ones at work. We also use deep links to support third-party tournaments and get-togethers. A separate association uses them to allow groups of people to all click a link and instantly show up on the first tee with the group of people that you want to play with. If a room is full, we create a new room, and new people join that room until it's full or the game starts. This allows the same links to be used every week and makes it easy to join a group without asking about room names or invites. It's especially helpful if you have a group of people where everyone isn't a friend. Multiplayer services have been critical when developing Golf Plus to make the app more social and bring people together. Now I'm going to hand it over to Franklin, who is going to talk more about how apps can help users feel safe while in VR.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Ryan. That's awesome. Okay, multiplayer gaming is great, but now let's be realistic and imagine a scenario I would bet everyone here is unfortunately familiar with. You're playing a game, and suddenly the gaming banter has gone too far to the point of harassment. It doesn't really matter why. If you can't get rid of them quickly, your experience is ruined. And even worse, if you see them again and again and again, you're gonna start to get turned off from that app. In many cases, indeed for over 40% of users, according to Unity's research, this is the moment when they decide to leave an app. And certainly, some of these do not come back. So, in addition to being obviously bad for users, these experiences are also bad for all of us here today who, of course, want to provide the safe experiences that help maximize user retention and engagement and enjoyment. With that goal in mind, we at Meta want to offer tools for dealing with tricky scenarios like these, and the blocking API is a great example that can be used flexibly to help. Blocking, in general, is a well-established and familiar method of self-protection, often the first thing users turn to. Yes, reporting and enforcement can help in the long run, but giving users the power to protect themselves in that moment provides the empowerment and comfort that can really make all the difference in the user's experience. Indeed, many users already use our platform blocking, and with only a few lines of code, you can respect all of these explicit safety preferences. That is a big step towards keeping the experiences in your app free of the sort of unnecessary harm that comes from a user that you could have known was blocked, but did not. Furthermore, a rising tide lifts all boats. By creating blocks that can then be respected in other apps, you'll also be helping make the rest of the ecosystem safer. Now, the API that grants access to this data is straightforward for developers as well as for users. Since we have a lot of developers here today, let's start with that. Like I said, it's pretty simple. To write data, there is a single API in the Platform SDK that takes in a target user ID and pops up a platform dialog where the user can confirm or cancel the block. You'll see what this looks like in just a minute. Either way, the result is passed back to your app via a callback. And of course, there is also a corresponding API that does the exact same for unblocking. To read data, there is another API for querying which of your app's users a given user has blocked. So that you can incorporate this info in the way that makes the most sense for your app, this query can be run on the client, also via the Platform SDK, or directly from your server via Graph API. Moving on to the user side, here's a bit of a demo to illustrate the experience. Users can block others in 2 clicks directly from MetaQuest Home or any app that integrates the API. This block can then apply on the platform as well as in all integrated apps. For example, if Dan is harassing me in my favorite multiplayer game, I can use their in-game block button or action to open the block dialog. Once I click confirm, Dan will also be blocked from contacting me on the platform, for example, following or messaging me, as well as from abusing me within other integrated apps. I'd specifically like to call out that the demo you see here comes from one of a handful of public sample apps we produce called Shared Spaces that anyone can look to for example code for this and other APIs. It's a great resource, though I do hope your apps have stronger blocking protection than just a spinning icon. When it comes to enforcing blocks, we've been thinking a lot about your needs as developers. We know you have a lot going on, so we're prioritizing flexibility in our suggested use of this API. Is your matchmaking pool not big enough to handle blocks? That's okay. There are still lots of small product improvements you can make without requiring significant work or compromising your overall experience. For example, since chat is a common form of abuse, you can mute text and voice comms between blocked users. Visually, you can hide or gray out avatars, or you can pop up a warning and offer blockers an easy escape. But, of course, the most thorough solution is to just put them in separate lobbies or matches when you can. As I said, while we are here to help, we leave this exact decision up to you and what makes the most sense for the social experience you're offering. After all, something is better than nothing. In the end, our goal is to make users feel safe and be safe. So, when all is said and done, I want to convince you to provide blocking protections. If you build your own, I would be happy to see it. But if you are going to have blocking, why not save yourself some time while simultaneously leveling it up by leveraging our platform and graph. Thanks for taking the time to be here. Feel free to scan the codes for links to some of the things we mentioned. And I cannot wait to see all of the amazing experiences you all are going to make to bring people together responsibly.
Hello, my name is Max Weisel, and thank you for coming to my talk at MetaConnect. For those of you who don't know who I am, most of my work focuses on the way people interface with computers. I'm the creator of a studio called Normal, which is a research and development studio that focuses on the way virtual and augmented reality can fit into our lives in a meaningful way. We're also the creators of a tool called Normcore, which allows you to add multiplayer integration to any Unity app with a focus on VR and AR. And we're also the creators of a title called Half and Half, which I like to think of as like the public park of VR. It's not a game that you're trying to beat. It's really a catalyst for conversation, and it's something that you use when you can't talk to someone in person. But today I'm going to talk about our latest title, Knock, which I like to call a sport for the metaverse. So today's talk is going to be about creating Knock and creating a sport for the metaverse. But you might be asking yourself, what does that even mean? Well, 3 years ago, I wanted to look at what it would take to create a virtual sport that is on the same level as the most popular real-life sports. I think virtual reality has the ability to combine the athleticism of real-life sports with the thing you get from esports, which is the ability to play with anyone, anywhere in the world. And I think that VR is going to be one of the most physical ways that we play virtual sports of all time. So, how do you create a virtual sport? Well, what makes a real life sport good? That's kind of the first thing to look at. When I look at the most popular sports in the world, like what is something that they all have in common? And the first thing that comes to mind is a ball. A ball gives you a single focal point. When you're playing the game or when you're spectating, which I'll talk a little bit more at the end, a ball gives you kind of the center of the action. It's kind of the thing that everyone is focused on. And when I started looking at esports, I saw a lot of first-person shooters, a lot of games where if you weren't familiar with the game, you couldn't really tell where the action was going. And there are a lot of video games that are based on real physical sports that have a ball. There's games that are based on soccer. There's games that are based on basketball. But in a lot of the titles that I looked at, the physics of the ball didn't really matter. Now, there was one title that kept coming to mind, which is Rocket League. Rocket League for me feels like a real life sport. It feels very physical. You get into this flow state. The physics of the ball matter, and they're what make every game unique and different. But it's also a game that you can enjoy as a total beginner or something that you've played. You know, if you could be the best player in the world, and every game is still interesting. So in Half and Half, we'd created the Star Ball, which sort of proved that the soccer and VR concept would work, but it didn't really have the depth that I would expect from the most popular sport in the world. And there's this quote I love from Nolan Bushnell, which is that all the best games are easy to learn and impossible to master. And I think that applies to sports as well. So starting with Star Ball as a base, our designer Dave added a bow and arrow. And for those of you who have never used a bow and arrow in virtual reality, it's something that feels really good with the controllers. There's something about the feedback you're expecting, it really lines up, and it's something that also is easy to pick up and hard to master. And I think when you combine that with soccer, we essentially get twice the surface area. We get a game that is easy to learn. Anyone can look at someone playing bow and arrow soccer and understand how it works, but you could spend your whole life playing this game and still not be the best player in the world. So we put it together, and it started to feel really good. I think this is one of the first prototypes that we played, and we got to the drawing board. We started thinking about how heavy the ball should be, the shape of the arena, the mass of the arrows. And one of the things we learned very early on was how important the shape of the arena was. Here you can see that the slope of the arena kicks the ball up when it's hit, versus in the arenas where there are no slopes, the ball kind of just always stayed on the ground. There was no vertical element to the game. And we just continued iterating on this concept. As it got better, as the bow and arrow started to feel better, as the physics of the ball started to feel better, there was this magical thing that happened. And that's what I'm going to refer to as flow state. Now, flow state is something that many of you are probably familiar with. The way I like to think about it is it's the moment where you're completely absorbed by a sport. Time slows down, the voice in your head goes away. And I think this is one of the most important things to get right when building a sport. You want something that feels more like soccer or basketball than maybe something like chess that's very cerebral. So by this point in the project, bow and arrow feels incredible in virtual reality. Combining that with soccer, you've got something that's easy to learn and hard to master. But something was still missing. Whenever we would play prototypes of this game, you could really only hit the ball in one direction, and that direction was away from you. Here you can see a prototype where we're trying to add curving to the arrows so you can hit the ball in different directions, and that kind of worked. But the real crux of the issue was that Nock needed a way to move. If you look at movement in any real sport, it's very important to the game. There's like an entire meta game about where you are, where your teammates are, where your opponents are, where you think people are going to go. There's inherent risk to leaving your goal, and the position of yourself on the field really matters. So that's something that I wanted to bring to Nock. One of the first things that we tried was instant teleport, and we created a few pads that you can move between. And the way this worked is you would point the bottom of your bow in the direction you wanted to move, and you'd click a button and you'd move there. But very quickly, we learned that this just absolutely breaks your flow state. And so this rule started to develop that we could not use instant teleport. And there are a few other reasons. I mean, in addition to breaking your flow state, you can't really predict your opponent's movements if you can move instantly. If you're looking at people and they just immediately jump between pads on the field, that meta game of thinking about where players are and trying to even trick people into thinking you're going in a different direction doesn't really apply. You lose out on that. And if you can move instantly, there's no risk. If you leave your goal and you go to score on your opponent's goal, if the ball goes over your head, there's nothing keeping you from just jumping back and defending your own goal. But as we got farther in development, one of the most important things was that it gives you depth perception. So when you move instantly, you have to get your bearings, but a lot of people think that your depth perception comes from stereoscopic vision. And that's true with anything that's at arm's length. But once you get about 18 feet away, all of your depth perception comes from parallax. And I've got a good example of that here. So in this clip, it starts still, but as soon as the camera starts moving, you instantly know how far away the pillars are, how far away the goal is. All of that depth information clicks into place. And so with a teleport mechanism in a virtual sport, it's got to be something where you move smoothly in order to get those depth cues, in order to be able to understand where the ball is. And so the challenge really became, how do we make smooth movement without motion sickness? So I knew this was possible. In Starball, we had smooth movement, and it didn't really make anyone motion sick. I get motion sick pretty easily. But this wouldn't really work for a game where you need to be on the field. And we tried a lot of prototypes, but the one that worked the best is what I call ski locomotion. And ski locomotion works like you're on this giant omnidirectional ski, and you use your bow as a ski pole to slowly push yourself in any direction. And as you build up momentum, you just continue sliding, and you can use that time essentially to try and hit the ball or to play the game. So you're using your bow as a ski pole to like get momentum going, and then as you're sliding along, you can play the game. And to our surprise, this did not make us motion sick. I think for me, maybe after an hour, I would feel a little bit, but maybe for a day or so. But this was the smoothest movement we could get without any motion sickness. And a lot of people ask me, how does this work? How does this not make you motion sick? And honestly, I'm not entirely certain, but I have a few ideas. The first is very specific to our title, which is you spend all of your time looking at the ball instead of the world. You're hyper-focused on this moving object, and I think it doesn't allow you really to have the ability to get the depth cues that would normally throw you off or make your brain think that something doesn't line up that would make you motion sick. But also, you're never really introducing that much acceleration. In the same way that when you're on a plane and you're going 400 miles an hour, you don't really feel like you're moving. It's not how fast you're moving, it's how much you're changing your speed that makes you feel sick. And by using a ski pole that just gradually adds small bits of momentum, you don't really get that feeling of large changes in acceleration. And of course, something we learned from Half and Half was no close visual landmarks. If you keep the scene pretty simple and you keep everything pretty far away, objects just do not move as fast, and your brain doesn't really possess the ability to understand really how fast you're moving. There's one more point, which I won't go into here. It's sort of out of the scope of this talk, but it's a thing that I call perfect deceleration. And I think when you're moving the camera in virtual reality, you need to do it in a way that's maybe a little bit smoother than the way you would move a physics body in VR otherwise. But here's a QR code. If you'd like to learn more about this, you can scan that and it'll link to a thread where I go into more detail. So at this point, we've got ski locomotion, and it checks all the boxes for a virtual sport. You've got smooth movement, so you never lose your flow state. You can predict where your opponents are going to move, and you can use this to fake them into thinking you're moving in a different direction than maybe you're going to go. And your position on the field matters. So if I leave my goal to go score on an opponent and the ball goes over my head, I have to really work to get back. And in most cases, I'm not going to be able to get back fast enough. So you're constantly thinking about the risk of where you are on the field and where your teammate is on the field. But of course, the most important one here is depth perception. If you've got smooth movement, if you've got parallax, you can understand where the ball is, you can understand where the goal is, and it gives you the ability to actually hit this ball with a bow and arrow. Now, I have another example that I want to show of this, which is ski pole was great for moving on the field, but there was this verticality you get from something like Rocket League that I wanted to bring to this game. So we added the ability to jump. And you can see here, as soon as you jump, all of this depth information comes into play. You understand how far away the ball is, how fast it's moving, where it is in relation to the goal, and it gives you the information you need to hit it with a bow and arrow and score. So by this point, we've got a core mechanic that's easy to learn and hard to master. What's next? Well, of course, you need people to play with. You want every game to feel competitive. You want them to not be too hard where people get discouraged early on, but you also want them to not be too easy where it gets boring. And virtual reality solves that. I mean, you can play with anyone anywhere in the world. There's a very large pool of people you can pull from. And so it's possible to make matches that are always balanced. And luckily, esports have solved this with skill-based matchmaking. There's a lot of different algorithms you can use. I won't go into details about any specific one, but they all follow the same pattern, which is that matches start off fun and challenging. You're playing with people who also just got the game, who are at the same skill level as you. As you practice, you get better at the game, and you start climbing through the ranks. And so the matchmaker becomes aware that you're winning more games, you're getting better at the game, and it starts matching you with more skilled opponents. And right about this point, you start getting crushed. But not too hard. The matches are still fun, they're still challenging, and the cycle repeats. So at this point, we've got a game that's easy to learn, difficult to master. We've got people to play with, but there's a lot of sports like that. So I wanted to think about really what is separating the most popular sports from the rest of sports. And to me, that is the culture. If you look at the culture of different sports, the teams are famous, the players are famous, streetwear, fashion play a huge role, and the most popular sports in the world have the most popular culture. There's a reason that football in America is more popular here than, say, soccer in Europe. It's not because one mechanic is better than the other or they have better players to play against. It's because of the culture that surrounds the game. If culture is something that people enjoy together, I think if the sport is fun to watch with other people, the rest will follow. And so when I look at all of the most popular and the most watched sports, what do they all have in common? You might be able to guess. It's a ball. So in addition to a ball making a great sport for players, it's also really great for spectators. It's what drives the energy, the suspense. You don't have to know anything about the game I'll show a clip here from Knock, and just from following the ball, you realize you don't have to look at the players. You don't even have to know that they're using a bow and arrow. You can tell where the suspense is just based on the position of the ball. So as it gets closer to blue team's goal, you know you need to start paying attention. You're watching the blue players, and as soon as there's this breakaway moment, you realize that like they're about to score, and you can feel the emotion of the game, even if it's something you've never played. So having a sport that's fun to watch is important. I think this is, again, the detail that's going to bring the culture to the game. And I think it's something that is missing from a lot of esports. I think the majority of esports out there are first-person shooters. They're things that are really hard to spectate if you don't play the game. But so putting it all together, I think the recipe for creating a virtual sport that can compete with the most popular physical sports is, first, you got to have something that's easy to learn, hard to master. You need a mechanic that that you can pick up in a day, but you could spend your entire life playing and still not be the best. You need good competition. Something that we don't have the luxury of today is you can't really get, if you invent a new physical sport, it's really going to be hard to find enough people to play and to keep it competitive. You might be the best person to sport and not have anyone to play with. But with a virtual sport, you need something that's competitive and something where you can play with anyone, anywhere in the world. I think that's kind of the key that's going to allow a virtual sport to have a chance of becoming the most popular sport in the world. And of course, most important to me, it's got to be fun to watch. If it's not fun to watch, like you don't have the culture. You need something that people are going to want to watch, because I think honestly, there's probably more people spend more time watching sports than they do actually playing them. So the final result is Knock. It's easy to pick up. It's hard to master. It's competitive. You can play with anyone, anywhere in the world. And most importantly, it's fun to watch. This is the first step in a very long journey to create a virtual sport that's on the same level as a physical sport. But I want to show you guys the final product. Wonderful. Thank you so much. My name is Max Weisel, and thank you for coming to my talk, Creating a Sport for the Metaverse.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to our panel about growing your community in VR with integrity and trust. I'm Mari Kyle, and I'm your moderator, and I'm so happy to be here. This is a topic that's really close to my heart. I've been playing online games since I was in middle school, so I know fully well what it's like to want safety in a virtual space. I'm really lucky to be here today with three incredible panelists who are truly at the forefront of making our virtual worlds safer. So I'll start with a bit of an introduction. I'd love to hear from each of you, your name, your title, which company you're with, and then if you can sum up what integrity in VR means to you in one word. I will kick us off. So my name is Mari Kyle, and I am a game producer at Meta with our Oculus Studios team. To me, integrity means inclusion. I will kick it off to Josh.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Josh Buxbaum. I'm the co-founder of Web Purify. And for me, I think the word comfort comes to mind. The ability to make players feel comfortable, feel at home, feel safe, right? That's really our mission. So yeah, comfort.
I love that. Comfort is huge in VR across the board, and I love to hear it here. John?
That absolutely resonates on this end as well. Thanks again for having us, Mari. My name is John Connell. I am Head of Business Development over at Modulate. And if I had to boil it down into one word, safety would be the word.
Yeah, my name is Simon. I'm Director of Business Development at Hive. And if I had to boil down what integrity in VR means to me, I'd really have to say it's it's trust. We want players to have a fun experience, and they need to trust that platforms are going to help keep them safe.
All right, thanks so much for answering that, guys. And I'd love for each of you to go through your solutions and talk about what you offer for moderation and integrity in VR.
Sure. So we're Web Purify. We've been in the content moderation space for 16 years, moderating text, images, videos, 24/7. We approach that with a combination of AI and live teams. Specifically for VR, though, we recently launched our new VR moderation studio, which is something we're extremely excited about. We have a very large human team in-game, 24/7, monitoring these communities. But what's really interesting, because this really is a learning curve for us, is these moderators have significant impact beyond just keeping the community safe. We've found that they're acting now as ambassadors. So when new players come and they're a little disoriented, our players act as friendly helpers, we call them, to help orient those players. And it really helps with player retention, right? Because people leave real quickly if they can't figure it out. And then we're essentially a QA team because we're in the game 24/7. So if there's a technical issue, we can alert the devs pretty quick. And we do these roundtables every month where we provide feedback like, what are the common pain points among players? So having those live teams in there, obviously the main goal is moderation, but they've had significant impact beyond that.
I love it. As a game producer, I'm so appreciative of teams that are actually in the game and really experiencing them. John?
Absolutely. At Modulate, we are offering a proactive voice moderation platform that goes in and identifies the worst harms that are happening and then allows for studios to address those harms. Different than speech-to-text technology that will transcribe voice chat or legacy player reporting infrastructure that will oftentimes miss the most egregious, nefarious activities that are happening because the onus is on the players to report that bad behavior. We identify it with AI/ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and what that means for us and for our customers is that we're now able to provide visibility into more than 30x the bad behavior than they even knew was happening in games for VR studios like Rec Room and Gun Raiders. And longer term, we also work with their moderation teams to basically figure out how it is that we can autonomously replicate some of these actions that their mods are taking, further reducing the impact that really is responsibility on the shoulders of the studio and making that environment a safer and inclusive space for their players.
That's amazing. That visibility stat that you bring about 30 times more is always so astounding to me. It's such great work. Simon.
Yeah, well, at Hive, we offer cloud-based AI solutions, and these solutions effectively help companies automate the full process of automation, right? In days past, you had the issue of tons of people sitting in a room trying to moderate content. And as we progress today, and especially in the VR space in particular, the real-time aspect of moderation is going to be particularly important. In particular with Hive, we really think about this from a couple of different perspectives, right? Stakeholders are really important for us. And so when we think about moderation, we try to be a thought partner with our clients and think through, who are the stakeholders? Who are we moderating for, right? Are we moderating for players? Are we moderating for advertisers? Are we moderating for the internal, stakeholders within the company, right? And so we try to partner with companies and really, help them think through best practices and how they should be forming their trust and safety guidance.
I love that. There's so many teams that are involved when it comes to moderation and integrity, and that kind of transparency and visibility across them is amazing. I want to move on to our first question. So historically, VR has been grounded in games. What challenges do you feel that legacy presents to moderation in VR?
I think being grounded in gaming comes with its own challenges, right? So gaming historically is extremely competitive, anonymous, and can lead to some pretty toxic interactions, right? And so with being rooted in gaming comes with its own challenges. Now you add VR and the variables that come with VR, this heightened sense of presence or heightened sense of reality, people's ability to sort of cross personal boundaries, if you will. So that adds a whole other layer of concern from a moderation standpoint. Yeah, that creates a bunch of challenges beyond the initial challenges that came with just gaming in general.
Yeah.
But then you add the VR, and then it's more complicated.
Yeah, for sure. It almost feels like a whole different problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. To Josh's point, if you dig and you uncover the layers there, right, it's an entirely new way of expressing oneself. in a virtual environment relative to the way that you might engage in a 2D environment. You know, if your phone screen, maybe it's a console game that you're playing, a computer screen that you're taking a look at, where chat, for example, was the primary mode of conversation, voice as well. But in an immersive environment, you now, on top of voice, have player-to-player interaction. And so from a studio perspective, the various principles of how do you moderate now physical attribution, whether that's one player, hugging another, or in some cases giving the middle finger, right? There are unfortunate realities around how it is that some of these systems can now be abused. So putting into place processes and systems to address the ways in which players will engage is going to be particularly important moving forward.
Yeah, and I think Josh and John both alluded to this, but there's this idea of sort of the proximity of the engagement, right? In the VR space, the nature of that engagement happens up close and center. And I think for us, the way we think about this is, how is VR going to develop? And specifically, are people going to be sharing content in a new type of way? And that engagement, you could have one VR player sharing files, right? You could have them sharing videos directly to another player. And so we think about this and what is that marketplace of VR going to look like? And within players actually engaging with each other, what types of content and novel ways of sharing content will they actually do that? And how can Hive, help companies think through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of want to go with you for this next question. Thinking about ways to do that, how are humans and AI going to work together to fix this problem? I know we have a range of tooling here between the three of you, from humans to AI, so I would love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So, humans play, a very crucial role in the process of building AI models, right? Humans are always going to be required to build models, to train data, to label things. And humans are very good at understanding subjective, more subjective tasks, right? When people, you ask a person looks upset, right? Is a person angry? That's probably a cue that a human is more apt to describe and identify, versus AI models that are more focused on objective, is there nudity, is there violence, are there things of that nature in the video or the text, right? And so I think humans are going to play a big role in the component where subjective human context is important, and AI will probably play a larger part in sort of the more rote moderation tasks, like identifying, gory items or blood and things like that.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think humans at the edge will deal with the outlier situations, and then I think of AI as sort of the compute and scaling layer that allows for all of this to actually work. At Modulate, we think about the problem statement from the angle of identifying all of that bad behavior that's happening, the millions of instances, in some cases hundreds of millions of instances of nefarious content in a given game. And what we can do is prioritize it and stack rank what's happening where across the various categories of harm, and then determine what thresholds of detection need to either A, be autonomously moderated and take action on, or B, shared with a human in the loop to then review that engagement and determine, is it necessary to apply a strike, a ban, a mute, or some other form of remediation.
Yeah, I think historically, it's important to know this is new tech with new challenges, but the way we've attacked, we at Web Purify, again, doing this 16 years, we've encountered new types of challenges, whether it be text, images, video, and now VR. And so it's important to say, okay, don't throw out the stuff that works, right? We basically combine what's been working and then add new layers. And historically, AI and humans have been the most effective 1-2 punch at moderating this sort of stuff. And so, as these guys have pointed out very aptly, AI is real time and scalable in a way that humans can't necessarily act. But the AI, assigning risk scores and then sending that to the humans to further evaluate context is really important because, AI can't play games, right? AI can't understand the culture of play. And some of these games have their own nuanced subcultures, right? So you need the humans to get that piece, to understand the subcultures of the game, the nuance, the context. But absolutely, AI is essential up front. So yeah, the two as a combination would be really powerful.
I love it. I feel like the AI is so integral to getting the job done, but also the humans are so integral to building that trust with the community and making sure that they feel like they're in safe hands. Yeah. Selfishly, I want to ask a question for the developers. So how can developers make smart decisions about where and how to introduce moderation to their applications?
I think having the conversation early is what we've found, and I think you guys would agree that it tends to be challenging once a game's fully developed to then have it be an afterthought, right? How do we moderate this community? Where does it fit in? But having early conversations, and we at Web Purify love taking that consultative approach very early, because then everything's set up the way it should be, right? And so, yeah, I would recommend that setting these things up early, and not just where the moderators will fit in, where the AI fits in, but also reporting from players, right? At which point, what sort of tools are you going to give the players? But again, that has to be thought of very early before development, and working with teams like ours to get that in place properly.
Absolutely.
Definitely. If you have a community, or you are thinking about developing a community within your game, it is almost a duty of care in some countries now to go forth and ensure that you're building safe and inclusive paradigms for those players. And you talk to studios as well, and they're starting to realize left and right that making these environments better experiences for their player base can also be good for business. If you look at the impact on churn and retention and player usage to a deeper level beyond just the surface level of, you have a responsibility, a moral obligation, right, to make sure that players are having a good time.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, player experience and the overall gaming experience is the most important thing. So I think, platforms and developers really need to listen to their ecosystem and think through, what are the types of things that their gamers are saying about their platform? Like, what are they experiencing? How is moderation affecting gameplay? Things like that. I think if these platforms listen to the players themselves, they actually might derive quite a few insights as to, what policies are maybe a little bit too restrictive, and, in other areas where they might be a little bit too lenient.
Yeah, absolutely. I think listening to your players is such a key part of building that community and trust. I want to move on to our next question. What challenges do you all feel VR introduces to the tech industry's understanding of moderation? It's a tough one.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Again, there's this new variable, right? And so I think there's two challenges here, right? There are two competing forces. You've got VR, which is like an incredible technology. I mean, I remember the first time I put on a VR headset, I was blown away. You only have like a few technology firsts, right? That are epic. Whether it be, your first smartphone, or the first time you called an Uber, whatever it may be, right? You remember those, and it's so impactful, this technology. And the more real it gets, the more special it is, right? This heightened sense of being in the moment, and being in a space with someone else, and crossing boundaries. But then the counterforce to that is, the more real it gets, the more real it feels, right? And the more real it feels, now we've got a whole new moderation risk, right? So they are two opposing forces, because the tech is incredible, and it's a huge leap, and so we're trying to keep up and moderate that new progress. So yeah, it's challenging from a moderation standpoint, from a tech standpoint, but we're figuring it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point, I said earlier, I've been in online communities, for a really long time, and I thought I had seen all the forms of harassment. I thought I knew exactly how to respond, but in VR, it feels so different.
It's a whole new world.
Yeah.
It really is, yeah.
For sure.
It's absolutely surreal. And you think about, to the earlier conversation of new paradigms for player engagement, right? If you have people now able to sort of interact, and you've got new forms of signaling that are new bad behaviors, you have to figure out how to capture and identify and ingest that data, and then take action on that data, right? So from sort of the old school methodology of thinking, well, maybe I can just mute players. I'm just going to turn off my mic entirely. That, in many instances in virtual environments, ruins the experience. And so coming up with new methodologies of addressing these bad behaviors is, I think, going to be one of the biggest challenges that VR studios have to face moving forward.
I love that. Being able to, highlighting that muting is actually detrimental to the experience of co-presence, I think is a huge important part of this. And being clever about how to solve for that is going to be key.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's actually a good point. This idea of, with moderation, we don't want to sort of be too restrictive. We want to nudge folks to be acting appropriately and nudge good behavior. And so at Hive, we take the approach of thinking through more creative ways of, instead of explicitly banning someone, right, trying to incentivize good behavior. And I think VR presents a unique opportunity to actually incentivize good behavior. Some games have gamified specifically the process. When you're better in the game, you actually are able to access more of the game.
Mhm.
And so I think if developers can be a little bit more creative in how they apply punishment and how they think about how to incentivize and reward good behavior, I think that'll actually provide for a better gaming experience.
I love it. Yeah, we were chatting earlier before
Yeah.
the panel about how much we loved, those systems that really reward that good behavior. I mean, I love being like by the book good person following the rules in games. So I love that kind of innovative thinking. So what are some things that don't exist today you'd want to build for these new use cases?
Yeah, so we tend to, with this VR, our new VR moderation studio, we have, regular roundtables where we talk about addressing new challenges with the human teams. And one thing that comes up is, and again, this is sort of dream world, so whether it's feasible or not, it's a whole other story, but the concept of recording gameplay. And recording it strictly for moderation, it doesn't need to be retained very long. But what we find is we would like to be able to review an event and verify what happened. Right now with Inoculus, you can submit an issue, but you need to record it. You need to have a recording of it. And not always can you act that quickly to record in the moment. So if we were able to check the tape, if you will, and go back, as the haptics get smarter, double check the gameplay with the, where the contact took place, see the whole picture and assess whether or not, this was appropriate or not, right? So from our standpoint, and then again, the age-old stuff that works, things like God mode or reputation scoring, right? Those are all super important tools as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your portion about capturing that evidence is so important because so much of the emotional damage about harassment is not having like witnesses and not having people like have your back, believe you, and being able to capture that evidence immediately is a huge help for that kind of issue.
Yeah.
John?
Other than proactive voice moderation, I think about the community gaming engagement loops. Today, you have communities that feel like they're not being heard. You have studios that could potentially be doing more to engage with their communities and incorporate their feedback and have tighter loops around, to your earlier point on good behavior, code of conduct engagement. How is it that you get players bought into that experience at a fundamental level so that they're more willing and interested to give back to that community and be champions for that good behavior that's happening?
Yeah, I love that. Code of conduct is super important so that everybody has a baseline understanding of how they should be behaving in that space. Simon?
Yeah, from my perspective, we see this as a global problem, right? And so our goal as we move forward is to really offer much more contextualized solutions as we develop this space. We're seeing, gamers develop in different ecosystems around the world, and so we want to be able to moderate in different languages and be inclusive of all countries that are having a gaming ecosystem. If you have players that are in China or players that are in a different country, speaking, with Americans, can we, do moderation and make sure we contextually understand sort of things that might be, bad in English, but might not be bad in Chinese or might not be bad in a different language. And so understanding sort of the language nuances, specifically in the VR space, because I think you're going to see more global play happening between countries and people being able to do auto translate within the gaming ecosystem, but can we do sort of real-time contextual-based moderation across players, right? I think that'll be really interesting.
I love that. Simon, I speak Japanese and English, and there's so many times where I'm trying to explain something, or a cultural phenomenon and be like, this is okay here, it's not okay there. Yeah. And so that thought of having that nuance of those different contexts, I think is super important as we think about moderation moving forward. I think that's actually all of our time today. I wish I could talk to you guys for hours. You guys are so knowledgeable, so innovative, and I've just really enjoyed this conversation with you. And ultimately, I'm just really happy we were able to have this conversation. And I think it's one that we should keep, going, and we should keep evolving this discussion as we make more things and more solutions in moderation in VR.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, we'll see you at the next Connect.
Hey everyone, you've reached the end of this track, but there is still so much more to come. You might actually have time to watch some of the other sessions that are finishing up, so just head back to the Reality Labs Facebook page or pop into one of the other locations within Meta Squared. Karen, were you able to catch anything?
Yeah, so I checked out the creator journey session because I actually already follow all of them on Instagram, and I've used their effects before. These effects, they're some of the most mind-blowing, innovative, creative stuff I've ever seen. And what really stood out to me was when they spoke to how they got started and how they started from really simple concepts and even felt insecure in the beginning. And then seeing how they evolved from that to become as impressive as they are today. I think that's just so encouraging for anyone who wants to get started in all of this.
It's so true. And I'm always awe-inspired by the creativity and the perseverance of this community. It makes the future even more exciting, which is yet another reason why everyone should stay tuned for our final bit of the day. Carmack Unscripted will be live broadcast at 2:30 p.m. Pacific from Meta Horizon Worlds. Now, to those already in the metaverse, head back to the outdoor screen in Meta Square. And while you wait, feel free to continue to explore, network, and chat with other attendees and discover more of Meta Square. Now, to those on desktop or mobile, grab a quick bite, grab a drink, get some coffee, get some tea, but make sure to stick around on the Reality Labs Facebook page as our time with Carmack will start shortly. You do not want to miss his unfiltered take on the future of technology, so we'll see you right back here very soon.